Hello.
Hello.
Tammy's health problems had been overdone. Without his permission, that hook turned into Chris. He initially made an effort to comply, as he always had. He consented to film scenes involving his emotional issues, dietary struggles, and weight maintenance. Producers, however, desired more. They desired suffering, admissions, counseling, and contentious exchanges. He had been keeping wounds closed for years, and they wanted him to reopen them. His wife refused to participate in the narratives they wanted her to be in. They were interested in how his kids responded to his tension, anxieties, and breakdowns. Even though he pleaded with Tammy and Amy to keep family strife secret, they still wanted him to address their own deteriorating circumstances on camera. Then came the turning point in the story. It was intended to be a straightforward sequence shot at Tammy's home. No big deal, just a family check-in. Conveniently, the producers did not inform Chris that they had already set up Tammy and Amy to reopen old disagreements about how Chris had eyed easy in comparison to them. Even though they informed him they needed a heart-to-heart, they desired strife. They desired combat. They also received one. Instead of reacting angrily to Tammy's criticism of his privileged weight reduction journey and accusation that he was acting like a hero, Chris chose to remain silent, which was even worse. The team, believing they had hit gold, zoomed in as he gazed at the ground with tears welling up in his eyes. "This is good. Keep rolling," someone whispered. Then something snapped inside of him. There was too much silence. Tammy's voice grew softer as she realized something was amiss. Amy appeared unsure. However, the crew remained vigilant like vultures, anticipating the catastrophe. Chris's voice cracked in a way that no one had ever heard before. When he eventually looked up, he muttered, "I'm not doing this anymore." Producers initially believed he was referring to a halt, a break, or possibly a reshoot. However, he got to his feet, took off his microphone pack with trembling hands, and placed it carefully on the table. His breathing was erratic, and his eyes were crimson as if he was struggling to keep everything inside. "I've had enough of reality TV for good." Tammy stopped. "What do you mean, Chris?" said Amy in a whisper. However, he did not respond. The videographer followed him out the front door until he was instructed to stop. Chris would later refer to it as, "The moment I realized I gave too much of myself to something that never cared about me," while the episode notes would subsequently refer to it as a historic moment. However, it was the culmination of a gradual unraveling that had been taking place in the background for months or perhaps years. It was unknown to everyone, even Amy and Tammy, that Chris had been battling depression in secret. He had been bearing their load as well as his own for years. In addition to being the stable one for everyone else, he was the one who attempted to diffuse conflicts, arbitrate with the producers, continue filming when Tammy refused, and support Amy during her breakdowns. Even if his admirers loved him, internet trolls continued to disparage his accomplishments, make fun of his appearance, and target his physique. A man who has been taught to hold it together his entire life is particularly vulnerable to the silent erosion caused by that kind of strain. The actual breakdown, however, had begun even earlier in late 2024 when TLC allegedly approached Chris with a spin-off idea that focused on his risk of relapse rather than his success. They wanted to follow him to mental health sessions, diet consultations, doctor's appointments, and even his home life when he was under stress. They wanted vulnerability on demand, so they requested if they could video him weighing himself once a week to give the audience suspense. Chris declined. However, producers never enjoyed hearing the word no. Tension grew. They allegedly started putting pressure on his wife to show up more frequently. They requested to capture intimate moments with his parents on camera. They wanted him to bring fans back to the show by confronting Tammy about her actions. Everything culminated on the morning of his breakdown, which no one had the complete details of until now. Before filming began that morning, Chris got a call that completely upended his mood. Ratings weren't the point. It has nothing to do with contracts. It has to do with his health. He had undergone testing following months of feeling strange, exhausted, and breathless. The news he never wanted to hear was revealed by the call that came in while he was getting ready to film at Tammy's house. Physicians had discovered issues from his prior bariatric surgery, and he needed urgent monitoring to stop additional harm. He had yet to inform anyone. Nevertheless, he came to shoot. Then, without any prior notice, the producers forced him into a sequence that was emotionally charged. When Thedham broke, he turned to leave. However, the effects continued after that. Actually, it was just the start of a terrible and disorderly disintegration that pulled the whole family into an unexpected quagmire. TLC execs were in a frenzy following Chris's departure. Millions of dollars had already been spent on the upcoming season, and significant plot points were centered on him. After months of rehabilitation, Tammy's health had stabilized, and Amy's plot had moved away from significant drama. They lacked a compelling storyline to keep people interested in the show without Chris. They attempted to compel him to return, which was the inaction that would make everything worse. They arrived to his home. They gave his manager a call. They made a larger offer. They also attempted to instill guilt by saying things like, "Do it for your sisters. Do it for the fans and don't ruin the season." Chris declined. Producers were ordered to leave by his wife, who supported him. The deception, however, started when TLC started to put pressure on Amy and Tammy instead. They implied that without Chris, shooting contracts might be renegotiated and not in the family's favor, and said he was putting the whole show at risk. Tammy, already struggling with her own problems, lost it. Amy, caught in the midst, attempted to remain impartial. But even she said she wasn't sure how to manage the aftermath after she allegedly called Chris and accused him of ruining everything they worked for. Family dinner ceased. There was silence in the group talks. Chris refused to be controlled at all, but everyone else went into damage control mode. However, it was what happened next that truly rocked the production, not his walkout. He recorded a lengthy, heartfelt, uncut video in which he explained why he was done with reality TV after having a private conversation with a trusted individual. In it, he discussed the weariness of the mind, the health issues, the manufacturer's manipulation, the strain Amy and Tammy are under, the infringement of his kids' privacy, the melancholy he had concealed for some months. He sobbed. On the broadcast, he made admissions he had never made before. He described his feelings as being like a character stuck in someone else's story. Chris believed that his trusty friend would never betray him, thus the video was meant to remain between them. However, in the realm of reality TV, nothing remains hidden for very long, and betrayal is a creepy thing. In a matter of days, a production assistant managed to obtain a leaked audio snippet, but not the entire video. It then subtly made its way through the team to a post-production person, and amazingly to a junior editor who wasn't even tasked with the family's plot. Everything detonated at that point. Chris was accosted by producers who demanded to know why he had recorded an attack on the show. They talked to him as though he had already released the clip, which caught him off guard. He wouldn't say sorry. He wouldn't elaborate. His wife threatened to call the sheriff if they didn't vacate their property right away. However, it was too late. Panic swept inside TLC as word traveled like wildfire among the network's inner circles. They were more terrified of losing control of the story than they were of losing Chris. What if the entire video was released? What if viewers found out what actually happened behind the cameras? If people were aware of the threats, manipulation, health scares, and mental breakdowns, the backlash would kill the show. At that point, the situation became increasingly dire and gloomy. The network apparently targeted the members of the Combs-Slaton family, who were most susceptible to coercion rather than retreating. Tammy was the first one they spoke to. She was already struggling with emotional exhaustion after leaving rehab, so she wasn't prepared for another public feud. However, TLC viewed her as leverage if she persuaded Chris to come back. They allegedly offered her a bonus storyline that would include more screen time, higher compensation, and potentially a solo feature. Tammy was aware that it was manipulation masquerading as care, even though they presented it as an opportunity. However, she was also a little upset at Chris's abrupt departure. The fact that he left her and Amy to handle the consequences, and the possibility that his choice might cost them momentum, contracts, and money. A part of her therefore believed the producers when they whispered that Chris was being selfish. In early February 2025, she called him, her voice trembling with panic and anger. "You believe that you are the only person who is worn out." She said, "You believe that they only use you. All of us have experienced it, but we have persevered." Chris didn't reply with a shout. He didn't dispute. "I didn't quit, Tam." He simply said, "I got away." She ended the call. Amy attempted to mediate a few days later, but she was also conflicted. Her personal life was already chaotic. Once more, there were rumors of marital issues. The controversy surrounding TLC's hit reality show, 1000 LB Sisters, has always thrived on family drama, health battles, and moments of raw humanity that make fans laugh, cry, or gasp in shock. But what is unfolding now could fundamentally alter not only the trajectory of the series, but also the entire conversation around reality television. Because Chris Combs, the brother who for years has been hailed by audiences as the most sensible, trustworthy, and down-to-earth member of the Slayton family, has dropped a bombshell revelation that the network allegedly withheld $300,000 of his rightful pay, a claim that instantly transformed the narrative from quirky family dysfunction into a potential corporate scandal with legal, financial, and cultural repercussions far beyond what even the most seasoned fans of reality TV could have imagined. And what makes this disclosure so devastating for TLC is not just the money itself, though $300,000 is far too large a figure to be dismissed as an error, but the identity of the accuser. Because Chris has never been the sibling associated with theatrics or desperate grabs for attention, instead consistently representing the voice of reason and a stabilizing presence against the backdrop of Tammy's fiery temper and near-death health battles, Amy's turbulent marriage and struggles as a mother, and the constant cycle of meltdowns, reconciliations, and shocking health updates that form the backbone of the show's appeal. And so, when Chris, the man who seemed least likely to break the unspoken contract between cast members and producers, goes on record in a mainstream Access Hollywood interview and says in plain language that TLC shorted him hundreds of thousands of dollars, fans believe him, they rally behind him, and they begin to reassess not only the network's treatment of the Slayton family, but also the way reality television as a whole exploits the pain and private lives of ordinary people for massive profit, while giving back relatively little in terms of pay, respect, or mental health support, which in turn raises unsettling questions about the true cost of entertainment for the people living inside the story. In his interview, Chris explained that he first began to notice discrepancies in his earnings when comparing contractual expectations and filming schedules to the amounts actually deposited into his account. And while most reality stars know they cannot publicly discuss pay without risking legal repercussions, Chris boldly broke this taboo, saying bluntly that he expected to be compensated for the countless hours of filming, the invasive exposure of his personal life, and the enormous stress of putting his health struggles on camera, only to discover that hundreds of thousands of dollars appeared to be missing. And his words, "Our story has brought TLC millions, but when it comes time to pay us, suddenly there are difficulties, and that is not fair. And I will not remain silent," resonated with fans precisely because they cut to the heart of what has long been whispered on message boards and Reddit threads, but never said so publicly by someone so central to the show, namely that TLC takes far more from its stars than it gives. The network, for its part, has brushed off Chris's allegations as nothing more than a contractual misunderstanding, a claim that only infuriated fans further, since it echoed the corporate spin often used to silence criticism rather than a genuine attempt to address the accusation. And social media immediately lit up with outrage, with fans posting comments that went viral